Good morning and welcome to Nova Southeastern University College of Psychology. We'll begin our program in just a minute. And if you get a chance, please type into the chat where you're signing in from. We've got Miami, Providence, Rhode Island, Missouri, welcome. Hialeah, Boca, Atlanta, welcome everyone. Madison, Stone Harbor, New Jersey.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Davids. I'm an associate professor in the College of Psychology at Nova Southeastern University, also a licensed clinical psychologist. And sorry, give me 1 second because I'm trying to find my things. Here we go. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to invite the Dean of the College of Psychology, Dr. Karen Grosby, to say hello and extend the official welcome to all of you. She's actually traveling this week, visiting regional campuses, and intentionally protected time to join us this morning, which says a lot about her commitment, not only to supporting faculty, students, and programs, but also to community engagement, which is one thing that we're going to talk quite a bit about this morning. So Dean Grosby.
Good morning, everyone. And I am the official greeter on behalf of Nova Southeastern University and our College of Psychology. I wouldn't have missed this program, and I extend greetings to our honored panelists, as well as our students, faculty, alumni, and community members. This program gave me pause to just stop and think about the importance of what Dr. Davids refers to an integrated approach when community needs, and there's no greater example than what happened in Surfside, emerge. The university is Carnegie classified for community engagement, and some people wonder, what does that mean? And this program is an example of what it means. When the community has a need, and we never as a university want to be too far away from being able to support and respond and do work to support our community. So I'm grateful to Dr. Davids and the panelists for putting this together. A special thank you to Dr. Carlos Perez for setting this all up. And with that said, I'll turn it over, and very much looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dean Grosby. So, as we approach the first anniversary of the collapse of Champlain Towers South in Surfside on June 21st, 2021, June 24th, 2021. The broad objective, I think, of this webinar from our perspective is to share with professionals and members of the community some of our experiences responding to the collapse. Sort of professional experiences and reflections, but also some personal ones. But in particular, we want to convey some of the different tracks of response: the search and rescue, the emotional, psychological support, and the involvement of community organizations and the integration, like Dean Grosby was saying, of those different tracks or components in a way that enhanced the effectiveness of the overall effort and made the collective response so much more powerful than that of any individual task force or agency. In real time, in the thick of the crisis, though each group or agency was operating according to important guiding principles that are, of course, implicit for the experienced and trained members of that particular agency or task force, the integration felt at the time somewhat accidental. But in retrospect, we saw that what we were doing really fitted into a model of community-based participatory action that acknowledges that the value of our professional, scholarly, clinical expertise is limited unless we actively engage members of the community in dialogue and in action, and sincerely respect and attend to what they have to say about what they need. So essentially, we're offering a case example of how community-based participation can be integrated with professional, academic, and clinical endeavors to potentiate some of the therapeutic mechanisms that are inherent to the work of each of these entities. So first you're going to hear from Colonel Elad Edry, the Deputy Commander of the Israeli Defense Forces Search and Rescue Delegation that was commissioned to Surfside to bring their special method and expertise to assist in the search and rescue operations, and who also led the twice daily briefings for family members who were awaiting notification of the rescue or later the recovery of their loved ones. Then Dr. Cassie Feldman, a clinical psychologist and a graduate of this program, the PsyD program at Nova, will talk about the role of mental health professionals in the crisis response, and sort of the psychological first aid that was provided. She'll also address some considerations for grief and trauma anniversaries as we come up on this anniversary. And finally, Mr. Zomi Cohen will share his experience as a member of Hatzalah, a volunteer organization comprised of members of the Jewish community, and there's much more to say about that organization. And I will a little bit later as I introduce each of the speakers in more detail. So as you hear them speak, you'll start to see the ways in which the members of the community were actively engaged in the process and the difference that made in terms of not only the efficiency of the search and rescue and then the search and recovery efforts, but also in terms of containment of really the unspeakable grief that was being experienced by family members of the victims of the collapse. So without further ado or words from me, I'd like to introduce Colonel Elad Edry. Colonel Edry is the Israeli Defense Forces Brigade Commander of the Home Front Command Search and Rescue Division. He was formerly the District Commander of the Home Front Command, Haifa District, and he served, as I said, as the Deputy Commander. Yes, he served as the Deputy Commander of the Israeli Defense Forces Search and Rescue Delegation that was brought to provide really expert method in response to the collapse. So, Dr. Edry, Colonel Edry, he is a Dr. Edry. It's all yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Thank you. So first of all, my name is Elad Edry. I'm a colonel at the Home Front Command. In Israel, the Home Front Command is in charge of preparing the civil population for emergencies. And in a symbolic way, we are having this webinar on the very close to the first anniversary of the collapse of Champlain Towers South a year ago. And from 1985 until today, the IDF, the State of Israel, has sent several delegations that are experts in rescue to help different nations. In most of the circumstances were earthquakes, but as Dr. David said, this is a very unique case that we were asked to come and help and of course support the community. And what I'm going to speak about for the next slide is about my experience in that case. So what we called it in Israel is Operation Hands to the Brothers. It's a quote from one of our organizations here, because we felt that we really come to help two brothers in a manner of disaster. So we'll start by reminding about how it started. What we see here is the security short video that was taken from a southern building to the building that actually collapsed. I'll play it again. We are talking about approximately 1:22 a.m., which means that people are sleeping, which means that the circumstances are the middle of the night. It has a tremendous influence about how the first responders reacted to that collapse, but this is what Zalman is going to talk about, so I won't get into it. 2 days after the collapse, the IDF got a formal request to come and help because we have, unfortunately, the State of Israel and the IDF, we have a lot of experience in these kinds of cases, disasters, earthquakes, fires, big fires, and so on. And so we have a department at the Homefront Command that analyze the way that the collapse actually happened. And this is the first model, one of fewer that were introduced to the first responders and of course to the families of the faces of the collapse. And what we can say that it started from the red part. Here you can see the red part of the building. This is the ceiling of the parking lot. You can see here that the parking lot is on the ground and then it becomes underground. And the ceiling of the parking lot is also the floor of the pool. Here we can see the pool. So we can say that the collapse started from this part of the ceiling, that the foundations actually started to crumble, and then it pulled down this part, which is the elevators of the building. And as you saw on the video, the center is the first part that went down, then the yellow part, then the green part. All these parts went down in about 2-3 seconds. And then we saw, you can see here on the right part of the slide, that the blue part still stood for about 5-6 seconds, and then it also went down. These are the two Champlain Towers. They were built in 1981. The north one, which is called the sister building, and this is the south one. I believe that some of you, or maybe many of you, are familiar with the environment, but still it has this unique environment. We can see it's by the sea, very close to the shoreline. We can see that it's a very center street on Surfside. And this white building is the third tower that was built only on 1990. This is the project that called Champlain Towers. This is the sister building. When we first got to Surfside, when I say we, it's a delegation of 17 experts with 3 engineers. At the Homefront Command, we have special engineers only for disasters like this one that can analyze the structure and to point where we believe that there are voids, that there is a chance that we will be able to find trapped survivors, and in most of the cases, unfortunately, bodies. So here we see the sister building. When we first got there, we sent our engineers to learn this building, to learn its inner structure, to learn the floors. We can see that it's a very wide building. It is very important to understand because the buildings in Israel are very narrow, and we found here a very wide building with very large apartments. Each apartment is very big when we compare it to the standard apartments that we used to live here in Israel. And also we can see that there is there are very big porches, and the porches is one of the very exact important points for us as rescuers to analyze before we start to dig in order to find survivors. So this is the first thing that we did when we just landed here and on Surfside. And in compare, this is how the building looked like on the morning after the collapse. I mean, this picture took was taken about few hours after the collapse on the early morning. And you can see that the layers, these are the layers, these are the porches, which I pointed on the former slide in this part of the picture. These are the layers. In the professional terms, it's called pancake. Pancake means that ceiling touches the floor. One ceiling touches the floor of the next floor. And it means that there is a very low chance, very close to zero, that we will be able to find someone alive in this kind of collapse. It's a very cruel collapse. The part of the building that wasn't collapsed wasn't armed also. People that lived in this part of the building, in these apartments, they didn't, nothing happened to them. The first responders, especially the firefighters, they managed to take them out with crane, and these people weren't armed. And from here, I'm going to speak about the efforts that the Israeli delegation put on this mission. And I'm going to refer especially to the support that we gave to the families at the Family Center. This is, by the way, the connection between me to Dr. Feldman and Dr. Davids, because we were operating together in that Family Center. And we had the opportunity to support the community during the first 15 days of the mission. So how we did it? First, we took the Israeli method, which a lot of people in the media and also in the community talked about the Israeli technology. I can assure there is no secret technology. It's a very simple method that I think is related to the culture of the state of Israel, as a state that is always facing disasters and operations and is surrounded by enemies. So this is what brings us to be very experienced with dealing with these kinds of disasters. So first of all, we brought a few specialists. Here in the picture we can see an officer that is a specialist for what we call population intelligence. It means that this guy and a few others are they have the specialty to question family members and neighbors and friends, and basically everyone that has any information and any connection to the families and to the missing. So first of all, we printed the models that this department in Israel analyzed. You can see here very big pictures that this officer has on his table. Then we started 30 hours, very intense 30 hours of questioning the families. And why do we need it? Because as you saw on the slides, on the pictures of the site, we call the collapsed building the site. As you saw, we can bring there 200 or 300 or 400 rescuers, but if they dig in the wrong places that are empty and no one actually was there, so it's useless. The Israeli method, talking about getting the right information from people that can supply, that can provide that information about the accurate places of the missing, and from this information, from these officers that aim the rescuers, give the rescue units the exact places, directions, points that we believe that we can find the missing, the trapped. So the first and very important step by resolving this situation is to question all the families, and we're talking about between 100 to more than 100 families. It was a very big family center. It was more, there were more than 300 people, and we needed to question them all, and also to question a lot of people that were around this building. For example, the janitor. For example, companies that used to bring their packages to that building. So we needed to get a lot of information from a lot of different people that were related to that building. And this brought us the full pictures divided to 13 floors. I'll show you the model in the next slide. Different 13 floors that are very, very accurate points where we knew that we can find the people that were in the building, because we knew that they were sleeping. So we knew that in most chances we will find them in their bedrooms. So this is more advanced model than the models you saw before. These are the floors. We see here floor number 8, and the number suggests the number of the apartment. It's floor 8, and here you can see apartment 10, floor 8, apartment 11, and so on and so forth. So what can we learn from this model? That apartment 810 and apartment 812, they were empty. In apartments 8-1 and 8-11, we knew that we have only 2 people missing, and we knew the exact room where they used to sleep. How did we know that? Because we questioned the families about their habits. And I think that the most important thing about questioning family members was to understand the habits of the people inside the building. Did they used to sleep in the living room? Did they used to sleep in the bedroom? For example, there was a family that I was questioning, and they described, I mean, the relatives of this family, they described that the family members used to sleep, they were 4, a mother, a father, and 2 kids. So the father used to go to sleep on the living room. The mother with 1 kid on the parents' bedroom, and the second kid used to sleep in the kids' bedroom. So what we actually do is to bring this information from the population intelligence officer, and then we bring the engineer that can analyze the floors. You'll see it on the next slides. And then we bring the commander of the rescue team, and it's like 3 different layers. The intelligence officer says that the people on this apartment used to sleep here and there. Then the engineer says, when he stands on the site, that floor, for example, here, 803 was in that point, the original location. But now, after the collapse, it's on a new location, which is here. And the only guy that can imagine from the rebels the new location of the apartment is the engineer. And then the rescue team commander knows where to dig, because he has the exact point. We also questioned about not only about the habits, but on very special, unique marks of the missing. For example, you can see on my hand we have a watch. So we asked about their habits by going to sleep with a pajama, maybe with irregular clothes. Did they have a special mark, special jewelry, special tattoos? If they have an Apple Watch, maybe another kind of watch, maybe they have a special mark as a scar on one of the parts of the body. And this how we had a very wide detailed list of details about each and one of the missing, and we are talking about more than 100 missing. This is what these three guys on the right picture did for the first 30 hours to get all the information they can from most of the friends, family members, neighbors, and so on about each and one of the missing. And then we had a very big table with a lot of details about every one of them. And then we got to the next level. On the disaster, what the community, it's not the community of Surfside, it's the community of the family members of this disaster. What they need is two things. They need routine, and they need accurate and professional information that is given by professionals. We all understand that during these few weeks, as I said, I was there for only 15 days, but it took longer than that. We understand that this community of these family members of the 98 people that started as missing and then they were eventually deceased. They needed, they were in a very, very tough and challenging environment. They were very sad, in a great grief, and we understood that they felt as, I don't know. So what we understood that we need to provide them a routine, and it started with two briefings every day. One in the morning and the second on the evening. The briefings, as you can see here in the picture, were given by two professionals, which is the commander of the family center, Chief Ray Jadala, which is the guy with the white shirt. He was in charge. He was the one that was opening and closing the briefings. And he was the guy that the family members knew from the first day of the disaster until the last day. And as you can see here, we have also an opportunity to watch this briefing by Zoom, because a lot of friends and family members didn't want to come to the family center. They wanted to be at their homes. So twice a day, Ray and I gave them these briefings with a lot of details in order to give them the right information as accurate as we could. What we see here is, I think, the most important model and how we aimed the rescue teams from the information we got on the questioning. This is a sketch did by one of the engineers with, of course, with in a handwriting that says, this is the part of the building that was not collapsed, and this is the part that did collapse. And the bold lines are the porches. As I told you on the beginning of the presentation, this is very important detail for us. So he took this, and then he, after he understood and analyzed the new format of the building after the collapse, he digitized this model from a sketch to a real map of the site. And what do we see here? We see that there is a division to bedrooms and living rooms. We see the line of the porches. And when I bring 100, 200, and in that case, 500 rescuers, and I mean it, 500 rescuers from different task forces were operating on this site. And when I bring this big amount of rescue teams and rescuers, I need to aim them very accurate to exact points when I can find people trapped. So, for example, on the first days, before we have this model, I could put here 100 rescuers. They would not find anything. And also here, in this part of the building. And also here on the front. There were here a lot of rebels, but with no people to find. And then we could mark these places and to say, these are the places that for sure we will find trapped. And not only that, don't look on the blue parts, because the blue parts are living rooms. Only very, very few people actually went to sleep on the living room. Most of them naturally were in the bedrooms. So for example, a shift of rescuers can open with a brief that says, let's put 2 teams here on these bedrooms, and 2 teams here, and 1 team here, and that's it. And the rest of the site is not a place that now we can dig, because we won't find anyone. Because for example, here you can find yourself on floor number 10, and here you can find yourself on floor number 7, because of the very unique way of the collapse. Here's some pictures just to demonstrate how we saw the site. It's a very, very tough work for the rescuers, and the division between the Israeli delegation team members was that some of them were on site all the time, and from time to time, me and another 2 officers came to the family center, as I said, twice a day, every day, in order to answer questions. And regarding to what you do here and your profession, we understood very fast that part of the questioning mechanism on a daily basis was to start to digest the fact that my loved one, which could be a father, a mother, a sister, a daughter, a son, they won't get back. They probably didn't survive. And every day the question came again. There were a few parents, most of them were parents, that they asked the same question every day. They came to me after the briefing. I had, as you saw, a very big models on paper, and they could ask questions based on the model, and they asked every day, is it possible that my son is on the living room? Is it possible? And every day I gave them the same answers. And then on the second week, I understood that this is the way to start to really understand that this is a process of understanding, to get aware to the fact that they won't see their loved ones again. What were our challenges? And I'm almost done here. First of all, containing the stress of the families. I must say that in the history of the Israeli delegation, we never ever were in any connection with the community. We came as rescuers. We came to provide professional help to the local rescue teams. We never were connected to families or to any part of the community in order to get information about the sites. And here is a very unique case we have that the volunteers of Cadena and Dr. Davids and Dr. Feldman inside it, we were together inside the family center and containing all this stress on a daily basis. And the family started to actually keep in touch with us. I mean, they took our phone numbers and they called us. And by the way, until today, some of them are in touch with us. The second was to talk about the process. The inner team, our teams, needed to deal with very, very hard things that we saw on site. I'm not going to talk about it because it's a thing that we don't talk outside of the rescue teams, but you can understand that we experience a very tough sites to see a body under the concrete after 5, 8, or 12 days. Believe me, it doesn't look like a human being. Also, we needed to start at the beginning to move the family center, to move the families from being passive, from sitting down on the floor. This is how we found them when we just got from Israel, sitting on the floor, waiting to something to happen, not because the rescue teams didn't do good work and didn't search as they needed to, but because they felt that they need information and they want to share their information. And from the point that we came and we started to communicate with them, this was the point that they found themselves active and not passive. And in every briefing, I told them, you are part of the rescue effort. You're helping us to understand where are they trapped, where are your loved ones, and this is how we can reach them. As I said, providing a routine, and I didn't have any new details every day, twice a day, but still I understood that they need this routine. And from one point on this 2 weeks, I started to take pictures of the site, to take pictures of the dogs, of the rescue teams, of the equipment, and I put it on slides, and I came to the family center and I actually showed them what we do, because again, they need information. It's not it doesn't matter what information they need. Professional information from professionals, and this is what I provided them. And the last challenge, of course, for me as a commander is to operate on this ongoing mission more than 2 weeks every day with my rescue teams that came from Israel. And this is a very tough mission. It's very hard for the body, for us. Rescuing is a very tough profession, believe me. So to sum it up, what we did for our team, we had this daily process. Twice a day, we stopped our actions every morning and every evening, basically every 12 hours, I'm sorry. We brought all the delegation. You can see here all the delegation members. We insisted that we will do it on a hotel room in a neutralized environment. Most of the people, we send them to take a shower before. And then we sit on a circle, as you can see, the commanders and the rescuers. There is no division of ranks or roles. It's like you see here a very young people and very senior officers in the same circle. And then the officer that was in charge on the team is leading a group therapy. And when you ask yourself how we do it, we are guided to do it from our commanders here in Israel during the mission. So we are trained for that. The officers, the home front command officers are trained to do this technique. So, for example, when I did this closure, this daily closure, I address each and one of the team members, and I ask her or him to describe, how was your last shift? What did you see? What did you smell? What did you feel? Please describe a unique moment or a unique part of the shift that made something different for you. For example, one of our one of our delegation members described experience that he found a very unique jewelry with Hebrew on it, because there were eventually a lot of Jewish families in that building. So he found this jewelry with Hebrew words on it, and he was like overwhelmed. So once you speak this out in front of all your team members, and also the commander, the senior commander, me, or the delegation commander, is also describing the same experience, this is how we process the things, the very tough things that we saw. And it gives us the opportunity to talk this out and not to save it, the information for ourselves. So some of the briefings were, some of the group therapy was on the hotel, and some of, like here in this picture, we do it next to the site. It's on Hatzalah's room, which was 2 buildings from the original site. 1 week after we got back to Israel, we did it again. I mean, it's again, it's a very unique technique of the Homefront Command for mental closure, and we gave the delegation members the opportunity to get back to the regular lives, to the families, to the routine, to their kids, and so on. And then after a week, we got back, all the delegation members, along with 2 psychologists, professionals that observed the group therapy. And it took us a whole day to speak in different phases. I won't get into it now. And this one is also led by the commanders. This is the Commander Golan. Is the colonel also is the commander of the delegation. I was his deputy. And this is how we managed to do these kinds of missions with all the stress, with meeting families, with meeting very tough visions on site. And still we can keep on and going with our civilian lives, although we are officers at the IDF, and to keep our mental health. That's it. I hope I got the main messages, and I give it back to you, Dr. Davids.
Thank you, Colonel Edry. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Cassie Feldman. She's a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice and an adjunct professor in the NSU College of Psychology. She serves on the board of directors as president-elect of the Southeast Florida Association for Psychoanalytic Psychology, and she responded to the Surfside building collapse, providing acute services to survivors and victims' families as a volunteer through Cadena International, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to rescue, humanitarian aid, and disaster response and prevention worldwide. She also provides ongoing long-term care to those impacted by the collapse. Dr. Feldman.
Thank you. So I will be reflecting on the experience of the mental health response. Of course, you just heard about the physical response. And before I begin, it is impossible to move forward without thanking those who I worked alongside. I volunteered through Cadena International, which is a nonprofit dedicated to responding to international events that require a response. And I've listed my colleagues here. There were many other organizations present. I know some here today hail from those organizations, so thanks to everyone who is here. But we worked alongside those from the police department, UCF Restores program, who are mostly working with the first responders, JCS, and Project High, probably among others that I didn't even know who were there, because again, it was such a mammoth effort. But I want to make sure that I give them proper credit, and also I'm glad that they're here because we have a chat box. If there's anything that I miss, they can keep me in check. I have no relevant disclosures, and of course these views are my own. And just to provide some context, we have sort of a mixed group, so it's a fun challenge for me. We have some students, we have some people in the local community, we have some first responders, and then people kind of from all over and colleagues. So just to offer some context, I mean, the Colonel did an amazing job sort of setting the scene and the stage and with visuals, but from the perspective of psychology, we have to really plug into what this was like for people at many different levels. So the environmental constraints, South Florida, we're just entering hurricane season. Again, we're kind of coming up on the 1 year of this collapse anniversary. And so we're re-entering that space of having all the unpredictability as it relates to weather and hurricane season. And of course, like in the midst of already a tragedy, there was a looming hurricane coming, and lots of unpredictable weather. The first responders worked day and night in the middle of really harsh conditions, and it created a lot of tension for those impacted because, of course, there was a sense of urgency on the part of the victims' family members and survivors. They wanted to know about what was going on with their property, and some people were missing pets and other things, but the demands of the environment are important to consider when thinking about the psychological impact of what people were experiencing. Of course, the complexity of the collapse, as the Colonel mentioned, it was a pancake collapse. It's one of the most complicated kind of collapses to navigate from a rescue perspective. And because of just the nature of the collapse, there are chemical issues. People had household chemicals present. There were fires that broke out. The seawater as well, because the building was located by the beach. When they would continue to dig, especially towards the end of the mission, seawater was rushing in. And because of the rain and because of the seawater, certain clues and certain cues that you would use to make inferences about maybe where people were located or make determinations about findings weren't necessarily possible because the water would wash that away, which created a lot of extra stress and added discomfort for people that were waiting for answers. There were pausing of operations due to lightning, of course. It was a search and rescue operation, and at the same time, you had to keep those that were on the pile safe. I'll mention hundreds and hundreds of people that were there to support. There was the demand of thinking about how to navigate the pile, how many people could be on the pile, the threat of the standing structure that eventually was collapsed, and not wanting to make a move that was disruptive and therefore dangerous. And of course, when there's lightning, there are certain protocols in place to keep everyone safe, which created a lot of angst for people who, again, were waiting for answers and had a sense of urgency. It's important that we make the distinction between victims, survivors, and witnesses. I'm going to borrow this from Dr. Fox, because the needs of each of those populations was incredibly different. So we were doing a little bit of something different no matter where we were. We, as volunteers who were mental health professionals, were sort of everywhere. We were in the briefing room at the community center, which was sort of a hub of information, but also people were displaced, just trying to find places to stay. And we would meet with them in hotels and lobbies. We would walk with them on the street. We had to get creative with our intervention response. Of course, the duration of the operation would weigh on people. Ourselves, we expected that, well, we didn't know what to expect. We thought maybe we would be responding just for a few days. And of course, it turned into, weeks and weeks and weeks of searching and responding, and people had to wait for answers. I think about how a minute feels like an eternity when you're under duress, let alone for some people waiting 33 days to have remains identified. And then, of course, logistical barriers are important to consider when sort of setting the scene for what was happening there. There were streets shut down. Collins Avenue, for those that are South Florida people know, that's a main artery, which was disruptive from the perspective of the city, but also from the perspective of the families, that many of them had to come in from elsewhere, had to come to and from, and were bumping up against the same barriers of just needing to get to this building to get information, and were having trouble just because of the street shutdown. So that's a bit of context. The way that I sort of conceptualize the stages of the response in my mind, it's informal and it's something that I've sort of delineated myself. But there was the initial stage, you could say that was the acute response, day one. And then it sort of unfolded where there was the middle phase, which was characterized by searching and stabilizing. You can sort of think about that being the first few weeks. And I'll go into each of these and describe some of our interventions at the time. And then the closing phase, when there was the shift announced from rescue to recovery. Rescue meaning signs of life, potentially still the capacity to rescue someone. Recovery meaning recovering remains. So that happened essentially at the 2-week mark. And then there's the aftermath component for us to reflect on, where we were mostly focused on triaging and treating in the aftermath. And I'll speak a bit about that as well. And again, for context, the last victim was identified 33 days after the building collapsed. And for context, you can see where the IDF arrives, which is important from the perspective of understanding the degree of containment that came about with the arrival of their team and an inflection of hope. and then also their departure, which was before there were necessarily answers with respect to everyone who was missing. And they had their own process. Normally their missions are a couple of days and then they move on again. There's no community component, as the Colonel mentioned, and this was very different for them. And also for the community, there was loss as far as who was missing in the building and those that lost their belongings. There was also loss in thinking about the departure of their team. And we'll talk a little bit about sort of the process there. So the initial phase was characterized, you could say, by chaos, lack of order, many logistical challenges, privacy issues. We're meeting with people, but of course we want to keep them comfortable. It's not the same as being in my office one-on-one with a person. And the hub was really that community center, as I mentioned. There was really this outpouring of aid from the community and response, which was quite beautiful, but also overwhelming at times because the space where we were located at that time couldn't necessarily accommodate the volume of people. This morphed into a month of disaster response. So of course, accommodations were made as things sort of unfolded, but it was very much just try to fielding information as it arose. Our interventions were aimed very practically. We were focused on really like, what do people need in the moment to have routine, to have structure, to feel contained. So really offering water, offering food, asking if people needed a charger, if we could help with lodging, if we could offer them anything to just keep them comfortable. We really saw a range of reactions at that time: crying, panicking, yelling, fainting, fighting, you name it. There was really a range of responses and reactions. Of course, everyone comes with their own unique history and story, and I'll talk about how that sort of translates into the response. But one unique thing that we observed and that we noticed was that there was this defense against vulnerability in some ways. I would say the more useful interventionists at that time were members of Hatzalah, which Zomi will talk about, and also first responders who could provide answers, especially in those really early days. No one wanted to talk to a mental health professional about what they were feeling. They were in more in a state of shock and freeze than anything. So again, our interventions were aimed very practically. And I would say the first responders really took on the role of the therapists. We see a range of reactions. This is borrowed from Warden, and it's really with respect to grief, but it does such a beautiful job, and I've sort of modified it and added in some of what we've seen. But you can see various ways people respond in the context of receiving such difficult news like this, various emotions, somatic responses, various thoughts and behaviors really were different depending on who you were talking to. The middle phase was characterized by searching on the rescue team's part and stabilizing on our part, and I would say also on the part of the rescue teams as well. We really divided and conquered the work, the role of all of the teams who were present, not just Cadena. We were providing support to the families during the briefs. Some people were working with those that survived. We were liaising with community providers, many religious leaders, consulting with first responders, really working together to make sure that we were thinking about what was happening in a very intentional way in the midst of something like trauma and a disaster. Thinking function sometimes collapses as well. And so you have that parallel process to the fact that there was a physical collapse, and sometimes our capacity to think also shuts down. And so we tried to be very mindful of that as well. It's important to know context here too. It was the summer. So while we were intervening in those ways, the community was also impacted. Children were going off to camp and were afraid to leave. Those that were living in nearby buildings or surrounding buildings had lots of questions and had a lot of anxiety and were not sure about whether they should stay or make a move. Again, it was in that early phase where there really were not answers, and still there are not a lot of answers. A lot of work is being done to understand what really happened. Many people were displaced, and so the work was focused on helping them feel comfortable, get them what they needed. And really our goal, if you could boil it down, was to provide consistency and continuity. And in psychology, we would use the phrase object constancy. We want to provide a consistent presence and support 24 hours a day. So the rescuers were working 24 hours, 12 hours on, usually 12 hours off. We were doing the same, sometimes longer than 12 hours in the early days when we were just sort of getting the ball rolling and getting a sense of what was really needed. And I would say that in this process, in the context of this process, there was a cultivation of emotional intimacy, and this collapsed community formed. We were eating together. We were spending every waking second together. There was an area where members of the community and the synagogue were providing people food and support and a place to wait. And so there were members of Hatzalah present. There were members of Kadena present and others. And so we really got to know people on a deep emotional level. The closing phase, I say that it's characterized by realizations and actualization of grief. I would say for some, not all. The impact of the announcement from the switch from rescue to recovery was deeply impactful for people in different ways. Some people very much were contained by that information. They just needed an answer to understand what they needed to do in order to move forward. And I'll use air quotes there because that's an evolving process. But some people were waiting for that announcement to be made. So they knew, okay, I can hold a funeral. I can finally bury my loved one. I can maybe engage in certain culturally syntonic religious practices that I need in order, that are put into place in order to be containing, that I need in order to be contained. Whereas other people, I would say, still have trouble reflecting on that moment at that time and understanding what that meant, and that was an announcement that was really made and that this is the reality. And so it's very different for different people. There was this tension that people expressed between things feeling like they were moving too slowly and then all too fast, and a lot of anxiety on the part of the community, especially those who attended the briefs, about what it would mean that this announcement took place and that it was going to be recovery. Does that mean that we're not meeting in this room twice a day, every day, with the same familiar faces and the same community, with a group of people that know exactly what we felt and exactly what we're feeling, even though there are nuances in experience, and that support would dwindle? And I would say that the Colonel and also Fire Chief did an amazing job being incredibly attuned in reassuring people that everything that was going to change would be decided together as a family, and also that nothing was going to change too abruptly and immediately, because they recognized the value and containment that it provided. Of course, as people did receive information, the numbers did dwindle. The briefs were held virtually and people would attend to gather information, but less and less people were in that very big room, and it was deeply felt and impactful for those that were waiting for answers. I would say, though, for many people, the community center sort of served, it was a place to gather information, and it was a centralized hub in a lot of ways, but it was also deeply containing, that even after they got information, would come back, would bring food, would want to come and connect in a deep and meaningful way, even in spite of the fact that they had already heard about their specific loved one. The aftermath was characterized by triaging and treating. We as psychologists and other mental health professionals were tasked with assessing community needs. I think that this is an ongoing effort. We had to be really mindful of what resources are already in existence, what's already out there, how can we connect people to those, and then thinking who would be appropriate for maybe a group intervention, who would be appropriate for an individual intervention, or maybe both. And for some, do we need to create resources? Trauma and resilience groups, some people who represent that organization are here today, put together, mobilized very quickly resources for the community to address needs, among others. And we had to be mindful too that because South Florida is largely culturally diverse, there were many people that had to come from elsewhere and were impacted by this. And so we had to find referrals that were not only local, but also other places in the country, domestic, but also international as well. So a lot of research there. As far as the themes of the work, for those that are clinically minded or here as students or colleagues, I would say that the work was largely characterized by themes related to grief that you would expect: pain and suffering, loss, resilience, meaning making, never too soon and never in a forceful way, existential concerns, survivor's guilt, and of course, in the wake of trauma, there is this natural way that fragmentation occurs between groups, and there can be a sense of divisiveness. So thinking about how to address that. Of course, like our job mostly is to normalize and validate the range of reactions that emerge for people and help people really kind of strike a balance between remaining connected to those who were lost, but also focusing on how to honor their legacy and move forward. And I would say that that's an ongoing struggle for many people that I'm still in contact with and that I treat. In addition to processing and integrating new information, there was a podcast that was released. There were different TV specials, more information emerged over time. Of course, there was information related to the legality of the situation. So processing all of that information as well. We wrote an article back in October about some of the things that stood out to us as remarkable and that were extremely clear about the psychological strategy. And I think if you could boil it down, these 6 recommendations stand out. When you're intervening in a situation like this, it's not the same thing as doing standard therapy. It's really something that needs to be aimed at crisis intervention, stabilization, support, helping ground people at baseline. You as an interventionist need to be identifiable, be able to be visible in the room the same way the other rescue teams are in uniform. You need to have a uniform of sorts. There needs to be ongoing self-care, consultation. The Colonel mentioned their process. I would say that the IDF team probably did better than all of the rescuers and the psychologists combined in terms of creating space to process some of what they were coming into contact with, given that this is a very emotionally laden situation where you're absorbing a lot of people's emotions and reactions. I know someone had written when the Colonel was speaking into the panelist chat saying that the Colonel and the fire chief did an amazing job sort of containing the anger that was directed at them. You're absorbing a lot of emotion, and so you need to process the vicarious trauma of the event and the impact of that as a team. Can't be overstated. Clinicians in general that are selected to intervene in these scenarios need to be carefully selected. They must be interpersonally attuned, skilled, able to regulate their own emotions in the context of others' heightened reactivity, and be able to formulate in real time an understanding of what's going on and think very fast and implement a strategic plan, and also really be able to maintain what's called an observer ego stance, being able to sort of be plugged in and tuned into your own experience while also watching it from a distance, which can be really challenging in the context of trauma. And ultimately, if nothing else, in addition to intervening, the goal is to really protect those who are vulnerable, the victims, survivors, and witnesses. I can say for certain in situations like these and at Surfside, there were people who were present who sort of came with an ulterior motive and didn't have people's best interest in mind. The primary goals of our intervention, if you could boil them down, if I could boil it into one statement, it would be based on Wilfred Bion, who says, listen without memory or desire, meaning that the best intervention that we can offer people is the purest form of listening, active listening. And so much containment comes through that. I need to give a shout out here to Eitan Turk, who many of the way that I think about these things, I mean, philosophically, I think I embody them, but putting language to them is something that came through lots of consultation and processing in the aftermath. And he was someone that I've talked a lot with. And we talk a lot about the best thing that anyone could have done in that scenario was serving as an empathetic witness when someone is in pain, to have the humility, not to assume that you know what's right for people, even if you have training, especially in a situation where there's no existing therapeutic alliance. You don't have the time to do a formal intake. You don't know that person's history. And so you need to navigate very tactfully and very carefully and assume that there are all sorts of hidden emotional landmines and watch out not to hit them, because people carry all sorts of wounds before entering a crisis situation. And so we need to be aware of some of those things, and that there is danger if we make assumptions about what people need. We can add insult to injury, and that can be also very diminishing to people's experience. And so, you know, therapists talk a lot about holding space, and then clients are like, what does that even mean? But it's making space for someone's reaction, emotional experience, whatever they need to feel, whatever they need to believe at the time. You're not there to confront them or to make interpretations necessarily. And we need to be aware that we may have skills as psychologists and tools. And I know for those very early in training, it becomes really easy to feel like you want to give everything and offer everything. And you can feel so helpless and start to take on some of those feelings and want to, use every tool in your toolbox. But the best thing that you can do is recognize that this is a person with a unique history and story, and we need to resist the urge to counteract someone's pain, especially in an event such as this building collapse, where there is no immediate resolution, there is no answer, and there is no silver lining necessarily right in the moment. So all that you can do is focus on not diminishing pain, but rather be with them in the moment. And this requires a very high degree of self-awareness, self-reflection, and intentionality. Ultimately, if you were going to think about 3 words, and I'm going to borrow from Fox here, that guided our work, it's empathy, warmth, and respect. And you can see here, I've listed the interventions that we utilized, which are, some that you learn just in the beginning of graduate school, but are the most important. You can have the most clinically savvy interpretation. That's not what we're there for. We're there to help people feel contained. And I think that people who were there to offer interventions as part of any of the teams that did these things were the people that these victims, survivors, and witnesses wanted to connect with, and ultimately to not diminish the value of silence. In the aftermath, I think it's incredibly important to be sensitive to the notion of reawakened grief. I think that this can be anticipated in some ways and also unexpected. I know for those that I work with, they're sort of surprised, like, why are we talking about an anniversary? I'm going to air quote there because it's a sensitive word. 6 weeks or 2 months before the actual event. And then they realize the value of that, knowing what to look out for. Reminders can be tied to different things that we see, that we hear, that we smell. The power of listening to a song and that being evocative and going back to a different time and place or a smell. And that's the same thing here when it comes to reawakened grief. Of course, the expected one is significant dates. Again, like for some of my clients, we don't use the word anniversary when it comes to this. Anniversaries are meant to be celebrated and special and to commemorate something positive. So we choose to use another word. But of course, birthdays of loved ones who have perished or holidays normatively might bring up a lot for people. And we want to really be thoughtful about that. I would say not only for those directly impacted in the context of this disaster itself. Of course, we have in the country right now many mass shootings. So this is relevant in the context of any tragedy. But I think also for community members, for first responders, like our reactions are normal as well. And so it can be really powerful, evocative, and even transportative for people to sort of go back and reflect and engage in reminders. And we have options here. For some people, they really value making space for those reactions, engaging in a form of requiem, engaging in commemorative action, or maybe even forming a new tradition to honor the person that was lost. For others, connecting feels good or disconnecting feels good. Again, it's so unique and it's so personal. I think the beautiful thing about the experience is that, as Jen mentioned, and I won't belabor the point, there was sort of this natural, implicit and organically synchronous way that this community formed, and there were parallels between what the first responders were doing and what we were doing, but that wasn't formal or coordinated or agreed upon. There was something very intuitive about the way that we were operating. And in the aftermath, it sort of was fun for us to reflect as different teams to be like, wow, there are so many different parallels between what we normally do when we're engaging therapeutically and what we're doing in a situation like this. And the 3 ways that I see it most clearly and that we've written about are what's called setting the frame. And if you're a therapist, you will know what that means. And I will talk about that. Use of strategic language, which of course, we're always trying to be mindful. Language can be incredibly powerful. And then also a focus on unification is critical, especially in the wake of trauma. So what do I mean when I say setting the frame? Let me go back for a second. When we engage in a treatment, we like to give people a sense of what to expect. what are the rules of engagement? And that's very much what happened there. So I'll go into it a bit more, but with respect to language, I think that the manner that the information was conveyed by the commander and also the fire chief was incredibly important, because it was very direct and very intentional, and it wasn't sugar coated or cold necessarily. It was very direct and containing, and they tolerated the feelings that were being directed at them, I think, incredibly well. They were very active in sharing their thought process and as much as they could share at the time. And I think that there was a way that influenced the way that people felt from the top down. Word choice matters. I can remember very distinctly the IDF team using the word souls rather than bodies. And for many people in the community, that really conveyed a level of compassionate attunement that was helpful in processing the information that they were receiving. And of course, given that South Florida is, again, incredibly diverse metropolitan area, being inclusive when it comes to language and diversity issues was of utmost importance. And Maggie was there from the fire department to translate. And she didn't only translate the message quite beautifully from English to Spanish, she also did, I think, a fantastic job conveying the emotional containment and being sensitive to feeling. With respect to setting the frame, again, ground rules were offered, the documentation of meetings where people were present, trying to keep or maintain as much privacy as possible, having the camera directed towards those who were speaking, providing information, and not those in the room who were in distress, discussing who could receive those pieces of media if you chose to record. Again, this offers predictability, structure. Again, a unified, consistent, and coordinated presence gives people the capacity to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty. Holding those briefings twice a day, again, parallels the therapeutic frame. It gives structure, order, predictability amongst chaos. It gives people routine, which is actually the number one thing that we want to do in the context of trauma. And also a centralized meeting space, a center of gravity to address practical needs. People could get food, toiletries, information. The Red Cross was there. Local government organizations were there. Those that survived, they didn't have anything. They didn't have their birth certificates, paperwork, licenses, anything. They had to start from scratch. So anything that you could do to maintain routine, I would say, is the one thing to sort of distill down. Unification is key. I would say, again, in the wake of trauma, there can be a lot of tension, a lot of arguing, a lot of fragmentation. That's to be expected. And so it really requires an awareness at all levels of response, especially at a unique time sociopolitically where there's so much fragmentation in the country and the world on so many different issues. It's really important to rise above that and think about unification in that way, and really recognize the benefit of including all teams, diversity of perspective, and that everyone has something to offer. We have to think about person environment fit. What do we have to offer, and what's the situation call for? And how can we think about maximizing the resources that we have at our fingertips? But ultimately, I cannot overstate the value of teams working together, and then within teams, people being collaborative as well. I'll end on the note of community. The power of the community was so powerful, and I think was an element that played such a role in offering such a high degree of containment to people. You can see, and I know Zomi's gonna go into it, so I don't wanna steal his thunder, but Hatzalah, the Surfside area, and you can think of Surfside areas like Surfside, Bal Harbor, Bay Harbor, is predominantly Jewish. So the role of the IDF coming and being containing to aid was exceptionally meaningful. The role of Hatzalah there was exceptionally meaningful. You can see in the photo to the left, a prayer service every single day, a group of people gathered to pray. In the second photo, you can see Colonel with Fire Chief and Maggie. On Friday night, we did a community Shabbat service where everyone was welcome to come. It was more of an interfaith, I would say, Shabbat service. And then center photo, you can see prior to the IDF team leaving, while it was probably very embarrassing for them because they're a very humble team, all of the rescue teams and all of the first responders flanked Collins Avenue, which was shut down. And there was this symbolic way that we engaged in this walk from the site to the family center alongside the families. to sort of commemorate and celebrate all of the effort that was invested there prior to them leaving, and also to give thanks. And I think you can see Zomi there on the right side of that center photo sneaking in there. So it's you can't even really assess the magnitude when you look at it, but it was really powerful and it was very emotional. And then even in the aftermath, you can see in the rightmost photos a concert that was held by the local symphony at the beach in honor of those who perished in the collapse, in addition to, all the way to the right, a memorial service that was held at the local synagogue, where again the officials came and the families came and the first responders came, and it was a full house. So people in the community really showed up, and I think also in some ways served as unofficial mental health professionals, providing support and containment to the community at a time of great need. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Feldman. Okay, so next up is Zomi Cohen. He's the founder and executive director for Hatzalah, South Florida Emergency Medical Services, a volunteer not-for-profit organization which supports existing emergency medical services with over 120 community-based, state-certified EMT and paramedic volunteer responders and dispatchers. He's trained extensively with the Israeli Defense Forces and currently serves as a team leader for the Zaka International Rescue Unit, which centers on search and rescue operations and is a United Nations recognized humanitarian NGO. Zomi.
Hi, thank you so much for having this forum. 1 second, just anonymous. I just want to talk about Hatzalah and our response to the Surfside collapse. I'm going to share my screen here. Second here. Share screen. Hatzalah has been around Miami or South Florida for the last around 10 to 12 years. Hatzalah is a volunteer emergency medical service that's actually all over the world. We launched here around 10, 11 years ago. I'm going to talk about Hatzalah's response specifically here in Surfside, the Champlain Towers collapse. What started off as a ordinary Wednesday night, our dispatch team received calls for people hearing loud sounds, bangs, some people having difficulty breathing. Hatzalah sent units there immediately, which were on scene within literally 3 minutes. While we typically think of situations that we may encounter in our communities, such as car accidents, heart attacks, regular medical calls, very few of us are really prepared for a MCI, which is a mass casualty incident, which is what this was. So many of our responders got on scene, did not really know what to expect, did not really know what to encounter, didn't even know really where to start, especially with a scene of this magnitude. This was literally the middle of the night, 1:30 in the morning. This is some of the pictures from right when they got on scene. They showed up and they see a building literally collapse in front of them. Your first instinct obviously is to rush in, go on the pile, see what bodies you could pull out, see what patients you could pull out. You don't know what to expect. You don't know if this is a bomb, if this is a natural disaster, a structural disaster. Obviously, there's very little information you have going at that point. So your adrenaline's pumping. You want to help as much as you can. You want to be there for the families, for the patients. But obviously, as we learned as the time went on, that there was very little we could do simply to the security and safety of the structure, as well as what ultimately was happening to these patients. So this is some of the pictures that some of our responders saw as soon as they got on scene on that fateful night. This is more of it. This is, you can just imagine the scene of literally half a building just collapsing, everything tumbling down. Again, not knowing what this is from, not knowing if this was a gas leak, not knowing if this is a bombing, not knowing if it's safe to get on or not safe to get on. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but at the same time, you want to help. This is what you do. This is what you're trained for. You want to jump on the pole. You want to start helping people, saving people. But again, this was a very dangerous scene. This is some of our responders, literally a couple hours into it, after being on scene for a couple hours, trying to help in whatever way they can. Obviously, the world was just waking up to this news, this tragedy, not knowing what the next few days, the next few weeks are going to bring. Where we were there, literally trying to help out whatever we can with whatever resources we had. We were working alongside Miami-Dade Fire Rescue at that point, which actually went very well, seamlessly. But as we soon learned, we needed many more resources at the scene to assist us. As you canvass around the building, you can see the destruction, cars, buildings, everything was in total destruction. This response obviously needed many more agencies and many more different parts to help us and to help everybody get what was needed on the scene. So this was a multi-agency response from fire department, which was Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, to you had task forces from many different states, from Virginia, from Texas. They all had to get activated. They all had to gear up, drive down to Florida. Once we realized how large of a rescue effort this was and how many resources were needed, those first few days were really, really, really critical. Hatzalah played a really critical role in getting the ball rolling on so many fronts. As you can imagine, you have not just the families that lost loved ones, families that were displaced, families from the neighboring buildings that were displaced because they didn't know if their structures were secure as well. You had so many immediate needs from medical, rescue. Where are people going to eat? Where are they going to sleep? What about their medications? What about the loved ones? There's so many pieces that needed to come together. There's so many different resources that needed to work in sync to make this somewhat of a successful rescue effort. Hatzalah really played a leading role in meshing all these different agencies, all these different roles together so we could be there for the families, we could be there for the neighbors, we could be there for the community. Hatzalah is comprised mostly of EMTs, paramedics, doctors, but within those groups, we have so many people that fill different roles for whether it would be spiritual, psychotherapists, so many different roles that we're able to come together and work with other agencies. Kadena was there, High Lifeline was there. There's so many different agencies that came together, really helped from start to finish. Some of our roles were not typical of a EMS organization. When you think of an EMS, you generally think of an EMS organization, someone who is going to come to the scene of an accident, someone who's going to come to the scene of someone having a heart attack, someone having a trauma in the house. You come, you treat the patient, transport the patient to the hospital, and you go about your business. Hatzalah is comprised of all volunteers. So we all have families, we all have jobs. We're all volunteers. This situation, this collapse, this Surfside incident literally took us to an area that we've never been to before. This picture just gives you a little glimpse of what we had to do on the first days. As many of you know, there was many different areas that we were operating in. So we had the area here where families came right away, the Surfside Center, where we literally set up a whole pharmacy for families that needed their medications replenished. Families didn't have their medications with them. People who needed medical care, food, finding their loved ones, clothing, This was the place where they would all come, and we literally had dozens upon dozens of volunteers set up there day and night, 24/7, helping families trying to get back to the life, get back to normal living, get back to the routine, get back onto their feet, give them a bite to eat, give them a bed to sleep on, give them a phone charger. There's so many things that need to be taken care of on such a large scale. Again, this is not something that anybody really would prepare for. When you think of MCIs, mass casualty, you think of earthquakes, hurricanes. Most of them, you know when it's coming, you know how to prepare for it. This is something that many of us, unfortunately, didn't really prepare for us right in our backyard. So this is just a small glimpse of just one of the many rooms that Hatzalah was operating literally 24/7 for the community. And this was only accomplished and really worked great with the help and coordination of our fellow agencies, our fellow organizations, who really stepped up and helped us work in, hand in hand. Here you have another picture of our, if you want to call it, command center. This was in the Champlain Towers North building. This was actually in an area, if you want to call it the Hatzalah room. It was actually a mini emergency room. We had a place for all the task force to come eat, come rest up, shower. We even have a SARS therapist on hand to help the people coming off the pile. Their bones were aching. If you could just picture yourself on the pile for 8 to 10 hours straight on the rubble in the heat, going through that stuff, when you come out, your body is literally aching. So we had literally beds, we had IVs, we had doctors, we had paramedics, we had every medication that you may need, any food that you need, any respite that you need, anything that you need from these different task forces. Hatzalah was there to help them hand in hand, no questions asked. Many of these task forces, as I said before, came from different states. They came from Texas, they came from Virginia, they came from all over the place. They were camping out in the little campers, literally in some park next door. But many of them, they wanted the comfort of home. They wanted people to talk to. They wanted someone to, just to give them that comfort, just to let them know after they're coming off the pile that they have someone home to talk to, a good cup of coffee, a good bite to eat. And that's where Hatzalah and this specific center was able to be there for the community. It was so pivotal that besides they had their physical needs taken care of after they came off the pile, that they had their emotional needs, that had everything there for them to take care of. The center was used as well for the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, to hold their meetings, their briefings as well for their internal members. This was literally a one-stop shop, which we literally took over the Champlain Towers North building that was available for all the rescuers. If you could just imagine this one building, what we had for them, times have been many more other locations that we were staffing and manning literally 24/7. Our responders slept, ate there for days at a time. I can't thank our fellow responders, our supervisors, all our teams, from doctors to nurses, everybody, therapists from all the different agencies, who literally gave their time day and night. They left their families, they left their work. The teams that were there that helped everybody go seamlessly was literally, truly amazing to see. It was teams of babysitters from the communities helping to step in so their mothers, their fathers, who were doctors and nurses, could man these different centers. That's how extensive it was. You had literally people from all over the area, South Florida area, come and help in this time of need. As I mentioned before, this was a multi-agency treatment and triage room. So there you have maybe the fire rescue, you have the Israeli Defense Forces, you had task forces, you had different fire agencies. Many of these fire agencies didn't have a place to call them home. They showed up in their trucks, they worked off their trucks. But when they wanted to eat something, they had no formal place to eat. They had no formal place to sit and just debrief, just to charge emotionally, physically, nourishment, whatever they needed. They came to our Hatzalah treatment, our Hatzalah triage rooms, and whatever they needed, whether it was medically, they needed an IV, they were dehydrated, they needed to be treated. We were there, we were literally helped them through this this step. In addition to this, Hatzalah was there as well alongside yet Kadena, yet High Lifeline, yet OHL, yet many different psychotherapist centers there as well, dealing with the families, death notifications, along with the police departments, homicide bureau. We were there alongside every step of the way from the moment it started, unfortunately, until many weeks later. There were so many resources needed. There was someone literally who needed to coordinate, who literally needed to show different groups of responders and different people coming in to help. Everybody wanted to help. There was trucks and trucks of people showing up with food, with mattresses, with clothing. Someone needed to be there to help direct them, to help the families direct where they should go, what were their needs, how we could help them. There was so much coordination that needed to happen to make this effective. And I'm so thankful that together with all the community agencies and resources that we really came through and shined for our community. We came through for our families. We came through for the families that were affected by this and the greater Surfside and South Florida communities. Here you see more doctors, the governors there. You had so many people came and were so empathetic to the families and caring, literally offering them whatever they needed. Anywhere, no questions asked. It was such an inspiration to see, how people literally opened up their lives, their stores, I mean, I remember once we needed medications late at night and we're thinking how we can get things. We called Walgreens, we called CVS. People knew the managers of different pharmacies and we called at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. We had them open up special for these families. It was a beautiful sight to see the South Florida community come together for such a tragedy. That is the end of my slideshow. But in short, the role of Hatzalah, whether it be the medical response, whether it be the cultural connection to the area, we live, we breathe, we pray together with these families. We know them, we know what they need to eat. We know what medications there are many times. We live alongside of them. It was so critical to have this community-grown agencies to work together and sync together to have such a positive outcome. I cannot thank the partners here, obviously Nova for putting this together, but specifically also you have Kadena, High Lifeline, you have IDF, Golan Bach, Amnon, Colonel Edry. It was such an inspiration to see the daily briefings. It was so professional. It made the family so much at ease. It gave them so much belief and so much trust and relief to know that their brethren, that there are people from their community who knew them most, who know what they needed at time of need, who knew what they needed when they were so hurt, that they were there to help them get through this stage in life, get through this tragedy, get through this incident. And I really can't thank my partners, our teams, all the different agencies here in South Florida for working together so seamlessly. There's a term called Kiddush Hashem, where we literally, it brought together the best of us in such a tragedy, in such a dark time, that is really, truly inspirational to be a part of. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists for being here and for sharing your experiences. And I think that's that. I think Dr. Perez is here and will end the webinar.
Thank you all very much for joining us. Next Tuesday, we will also have a presentation on reflecting on the gun violence and lessons learned. Thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. The recording will be available by Monday or Tuesday, and we encourage you to share as needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.